Most people don't know the science when it comes to strength training. In most fields, you have to be certified by a certifying body. Exercise, that's not the case. You can have somebody who graduated in plumbing, and nobody will hold them accountable for that. But because we have an industry where you have professionals mixed with non-professionals, you see the discrepancies you do.
Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This episode is brought to you by ARX, the most innovative, efficient, and effective all-in-one exercise machines I've ever seen. I was really impressed with my ARX workout. The intensity and adaptive resistance was unlike anything I've ever experienced. I love how the machine enables you to increase the negative load to fatigue target muscles more quickly, and I love how the workouts are effortlessly quantified. The software tracks maximum force output, rate of work, total amount of work done, and more in front of you on screen, allowing you to compete with your previous performance to give you and your clients real-time motivation. The ARX uses a computer-controlled motor to give you the exact amount of resistance your clients need 100% of the time. This means that the resistance can never become dangerous, is intuitive and simple to use, and can provide you with all the results you and your clients are looking for in a fraction of the time. ARX is highly effective and efficient in delivering all of the benefits of exercise, including increased strength, muscle mass, cardiovascular conditioning, bone mineral density, and injury recovery. As well as being utilized by many high-intensity training trainers to deliver highly effective and efficient workouts to their clients, ARX comes highly recommended by world-class trainers and brands, including Bulletproof, Tony Robbins, and Ben Greenfield Fitness. To find out more about ARX and how you can get $1,000 off software licensing when you place an order, that's right guys, $1,000 off, please go to arxfit.com and mention Corporate Warrior in the How Did You Hear About Us field. So again, to get $1,000 off software licensing when you order, head on over to arxfit.com and enter Corporate Warrior in the How Did You Hear About Us field. This episode is brought to you by the Resistance Exercise Conference, the science and application of strength training for health and human performance. Would you like to learn from the top strength training researchers, network and connect with other exercise professionals from all over the world, join a welcome reception on a Friday night to build relationships with other strength training professionals, experience an early morning workout from an expert trainer to kickstart your Saturday, and get inspired, rejuvenated, and focused on your strength training business? I certainly do, and that is why I am attending and interviewing all of the speakers at the event. The Resistance Exercise Conference will be held on the 9th and 10th of March 2018 in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the Commons Hotel. To get 10% off your entry fee, head on over to resistanceexerciseconference.com, click the registration button, and enter Corporate Warrior 10 in the promo code field in PayPal. I'm very excited about this and I've wanted to attend for years. Sign up now at resistanceexerciseconference.com and get 10% off with promo code Corporate Warrior 10, and I look forward to meeting you in person. Hi guys, I am Lawrence Neal and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior, the podcast that teaches you how to optimize your health, exercise, business, and lifestyle productivity. My former guests include people like paleo pioneers Mark Sisson, Rob Wolf, high-intensity training experts like Dr. Doug McGuff and Drew Bay, successful entrepreneurs, life hackers, New York Times best-selling authors, financial experts, and many, many more. My next guest is strength and conditioning legend Mark Asanovich. Mark's resume is quite vast, so I'm going to trim it down for speed and convenience. Having served 15 years in professional football, and to the English listeners, that's the NFL, Mark is a veteran strength and conditioning coach. He's worked with the Jacksonville Jaguars, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Baltimore Ravens, Minnesota Vikings, and most recently Hartford Colonials. He's worked with an extensive list of athletes that have become NFL Hall of Famers and NFL Pro Bowlers. Mark was a contributing author to Death in the Locker Room 2, Drugs and Sports, and the new High Intensity Strength Training. He has also published articles in the High Intensity Training Newsletter, the Conditioning Quarterly, and the Minnesota High School League Bulletin. Mark is one of the most sought-after strength and conditioning speakers and has spoken at many prestigious events and conferences. In this episode, we talk a lot about his experience working with NFL rookies and introducing them to his strength and conditioning protocols and the challenges therein. We discuss the problems with the existing folklore that is quite prevalent in sports coaching today. We talk about variation to specific resistance training protocols and the protocols he has used on himself for many years. We talk about the importance and lots of specifics around neck training and much, much more. For all the show notes and links for this episode and all episodes, please go to corporatewarrior.org. Don't forget to hang around until the end of this episode for your free gift. And now I give you the strength and conditioning legend, Mark Asanovich. Mark, welcome to Corporate Warrior. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Lawrence, it's a pleasure being here.
Cool. So obviously done a fair amount of research prior to having you on, watching your various seminars on YouTube and listening to podcasts, etc., and also talking to some of my listeners who are big fans of your of you and what you've done. I just wanted to start off by talking about your history working in the NFL, and I'd just love to hear about the beginning of all that. I mean, how did you? What was it like for you when you first, acquired a job in the NFL, and was that like a lifelong dream for you? How did that pan out?
It really was. It was a deal where I was able to turn my hobby into my profession. And actually, before being hired by the Vikings, I actually volunteered for 9 years. And I would work their camps with them and stuff like that. And I suppose that is a lot of networking, but at the same time, it was a lot of hard work and a lot of good learning experiences. So when the assistant from the Vikings was hired away to Philadelphia, I was asked to become the assistant. And it was a lifelong dream to do that. And I was very fortunate to be around a lot of good people.
Cool, because it's funny. It's interesting that you should say that, because I literally just got off talking to Jim Flanagan, who's obviously a bit of a legend within the strength training community and Arthur Jones' right-hand man for a very long time. And he told me the story of how he worked for free for Arthur Jones for like 5 years.
Yeah.
So there's a common trend there.
There is, and it's called paying your dues, and you don't see quite as much of that anymore, but but there's a lot of learning that goes on with that too. So it's very productive as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly pay to work for some of my remote mentors. People who I follow, like Tim Ferriss and Gary Vaynerchuk. But they're so inundated, they're so huge and famous these days that everyone wants to be their student and would gladly do that for free, if not pay out of their own pocket. So I guess that's the problem, right?
It is, and you mentioned Jim Flanagan. He's a wealth of knowledge, and a lot of people respect him for that knowledge, but he's even a greater man, a husband, and just man too. Interesting.
That certainly come across when he was talking to me. Very humble, very respectful person, and just great storyteller. I was enthralled. I think I asked 2 questions and then he just went on.
Yeah.
So okay, cool. So first role in the NFL. I was listening to you talk about what it's like when an NFL rookie comes into the league and they're kind of given to you to train in terms of strength and conditioning. And it was really interesting to hear how much they do succeed in spite of their lack of training and lack of experience in the weight room. And I think, as you probably know, and I'm sure as you'll affirm, that they are pre-selected at birth, and they have these advantageous genetics that enable them to excel despite shortcomings in other areas and not perhaps working as hard as people sometimes think. So what's that like when someone comes in who's a complete rookie, who looks the part but has absolutely, you quickly ascertain that they have no grasp of what it means to train intelligently?
Well, that was the norm in the NFL, because the guys were so genetically blessed. And it actually was a good situation for me as a strength coach because I didn't have bad habits to break. So I was starting teaching somebody, basically telling them that now you're amongst other freaks. And so what's going to distinguish you is your physical ability. So I was molding somebody who was new for the most part. The hard part a lot of times was getting guys who did have lifting backgrounds, who had bad habits or a different way of doing it in their mind that they thought would do it. But generally, the first time I met with our rookies and our free agents would be in minicamp. And I would sit down with them and I would tell them that you are now Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And just like you're going to have to follow a new offensive and defensive and special team schemes, you're probably going to have to follow a new way of training as well. I know that most of you come from powerlifting and Olympic lifting backgrounds. We don't do that here. And I didn't have problems with that because after I would say that, generally 99% of the room would wipe their brow and go, I didn't like doing that stuff anyways. So it really wasn't a problem. I get in 14 years, there were maybe 4 guys that I butted heads with on style of training. Otherwise, the rookies pretty much followed what the veterans were doing.
What type of issues did they raise, those few that did clash with you?
Well, one came from a powerlifting background, another from an Olympic weightlifting background. And I'll tell you about the Olympic weightlifting kid. What I would do with those individuals is I would take them back into my office after the presentation and explain to them the orthopedic ramifications of that style of training. And that if they get hurt in the weight room, it's not going to benefit them because they're not going to get to the next contract or the next contract and the next contract if they're hurt. So generally, after that second talk, most of them say, okay, I trust you do it is best. But this one particular individual, I still remember he came in from East Tennessee State, and I don't know what they do, and I didn't know at the time. But if I were to tell him, he said, Coach, I understand what you're saying, but I still have to do this. Well, if I said to him, you can't do this, how is that going to affect his behavior? He's going to go out onto the field, and in the back of his mind, he's going to be saying to himself, that jerk wouldn't let me prepare. I'm not ready. So it's going to be reflected in his performance. So what I did with this individual is I made him come in either very, very early in the morning or very late after everybody was gone. And I told him, do what you have to do to prepare, to get in the best shape for camp. And I would let him do his own thing. And through that summer, there were many times where I would be working at my desk in my office and I would hear a crash coming from the weight room. I don't know if you've ever heard of a box snatch.
Yeah. Do you want to describe it for the listeners?
Yeah. So while a lifter is attempting to do a snatch, he is jumping up on a 16-inch box at the same time. And many times he missed. And so the barbell would fall and he'd fall and I'd come running into the room. And I remember one time distinctly, his shins were completely bloodied and he's bleeding all over himself. And I'm telling him, this has got to tell you something about this training protocol. You're bleeding. And he kept telling me, no, Coach, I'm violent. And I said, okay, fine. And he prepared himself all through the summer. We get into training camp and go to our first game. And we're playing the Dolphins down in Miami in our preseason game. And being a free agent, he finally gets himself, this violent guy, in the third quarter. Miami had a 3rd and long situation, and he was an outside linebacker. Now in the NFL, outside linebackers are going to have to make at least 5 reads. You know, if this guy does this, then I have to do this. If this happens, I've got to do this. Now, this guy wasn't a real bright guy. That's why he wasn't drafted. And so he's out there thinking he's a very violent guy, but he doesn't know his reads. So the reality was, when the ball was snapped, the right guard pulled around end and knocked this kid on his butt, his first play in the NFL. And he ran off the field, and my question to him and my question to all your listeners is this. In that very moment, what mattered? What mattered? Did it matter how many box snatches he did? Did it matter how many speed ladders he ran through? What mattered in that moment was he strong? Could he put that strength in productive movement? And was he smart? Could he make his reads? So that's the formula for training athletes. You got to make them strong, you got to make them skilled, and you got to make them smart. And if you do those 3 things, which isn't really hard to understand, you're going to have a good athlete.
That's awesome. I wanted to also discuss the reverse of what we were talking about earlier about how, you know, genetic freaks come into the NFL, perhaps not knowing enough about strength and conditioning. You also must have got the reverse where you were teaching guys, you know, at high school, who had the ambition to play at the professional level, and perhaps they had the brains and they knew how to train smartly, having been educated by yourself. I mean, I've seen some of your seminars. What kind of conversations did you have with those guys? Did you have to have that conversation which was like, well, you can work really hard, but you know, you don't perhaps have the genetics to make it to the professional level, and maybe you should hedge your bets?
Well, all high school kids are going to the NFL in their mind. And as a strength coach, you want to do everything you can to encourage those dreams, to facilitate high-intensity training, the intensity and the attitude that they bring towards training. The reality occurs when they are playing and what shows up on film. And they can be very good high school players, but through that process of just playing the game, players put themselves into different categories, and they see kind of where they are. Interesting, I used to ask NFL players, the players you see on TV and the players that compete in Olympics have very efficient neurological systems. Specifically, how fast per unit of time can you recruit muscle fiber? So I had Warren Sapp down in Tampa. Now, if you look at Warren Sapp, if he took off his shirt when he was at his prime, you'd go, man, put it back on, because he had an accountant body, okay, and yet he had the fastest step in football. Why is that? Because in a millisecond, Warren Sapp could recruit 400 million fibers, just like that, boom. And for me and you that aren't on that genetic continuum where we have that efficient, it would take me 15, 20 seconds to recruit that many fibers. So because he was so neurologically efficient, the cream of the crop rise to the top. And I would ask them, taking them through workouts, where did you see along your career, did you have this gear that you could kick into and just separate yourself from your friends? And most of the guys I trained said about 7th grade. They go, yeah, I could all of a sudden kick into this gear, and they were nowhere behind me. And high school kids see that. And if they don't have that gear, they see it. And so the consequences kind of take over from there. And it's just the reality of the sport that I didn't have to say anything. I mean, they knew whether they could go or not.
Interesting. And just going back to I guess those guys that came into the league that you then had to take under your wing as a strength and conditioning expert and coach. What were the sort of bad habits that you saw in their initial strength training kind of technique and form and things like that? What were the bad habits that you found you had to correct?
Well, first of all, it was repetition, execution. Instead of lifting weights, they always threw weights. So repetition speed, repetition range of motion, those are the big things. And then their intensity of effort. They would come in and they would do 10 reps and want to stop. And so you had to teach them how to work hard, and you had to teach them to work at a high quality of work. And then the other thing, the overemphasis on the bench press was always one thing. They always wanted to see how much they could bench one time and stuff. So I'd have to remind them that we weren't power lifters, that we are in fact football players, and that's what they get paid for. So we had no interest in doing that type of stuff. So there was some education along those lines, but the biggest thing I saw in my career was you had to slow their reps down, and they had to understand that their results were ultimately, they were responsible for it based on the attitude and the effort that they put in.
Interesting. Okay. So what was, just I guess before we get into I want to ask you about the protocols and what you found to be the most effective strength and conditioning protocols for NFL athletes and maybe other sports that you've participated in. But before we do so, who were your kind of main influences from a evidence-based exercise perspective early on in your career?
I was very fortunate to be around some great strength coaches. Kim Wood from the Cincinnati Bengals. Being at Ohio State, I was in close proximity to him, so I was able to learn a lot from his program. Dan Riley was another individual that I count as a mentor. Mike Gittleson at the University of Michigan was a big influence on me. Dr. Ken Leisner. Dr. Ted Lamborghini's was another one. And of course, there was always Arthur Jones. There was always Jim Flanagan in that crew as well. So I was very fortunate to be around, like I say, very good and knowledgeable people.
Because that seems quite it's quite unusual to hear that, because from what I understand, and I'm not, I don't live in the US, I don't understand the culture and the sporting culture as well as probably a lot of my listeners do, and certainly you do. And what I understand is that, or what little I understand is that there is a real sort of coaching folklore within professional sport, and there's a lot of coaches doing things very ineffectively and very inefficiently. How come do you put that down to that you have the correct influences at an early stage of your career? It sounds like they were more kind of high intensity training and inspired, and that were you just kind of fortunate in that you're surrounded by the right people, and in that kind of influenced you to pursue that line of inquiry rather than, I guess, falling for the seemingly less effective approach that a lot of coaches go down?
Well, I started coaching. I coached at the high school level, then went to the college level, then I went back to the high school level, and in my career had a lot of questions. So the high schools here in the United States run from September to June. So I would be teaching from September to June. Then in the summertime, I ran an 8-week summer strength training program for our kids. This would afford me 2 weeks off prior to the football season starting. So during those 2 weeks, rather than take a vacation, I traveled around the country, and I would pick a conference every year. One year I went to the Pac-10 conference, and I went to all their schools. I went to the Big Ten conference schools one year. One year I went to the Southeastern conference schools, and you get the idea. Over the course of 8 years, I visited 99 Division I strength and conditioning coaches. And I asked them 4 questions, and I would video them. I have the videos still today. And the 4 questions I would ask is, first of all, what is strength? Second question, given that definition, how best do you develop it? And then what are the best tools for developing that? And then at that time, of course, steroids were legal, and I would ask them, what their opinion was on anabolic steroids. And going around and doing that year in and year out, I think the biggest thing that had an influence on me gravitating toward the evidence-based and high-intensity principles was really not the principles themselves, but the men teaching them. I mentioned Mike Gittleson and Dan Riley, Kim Wood, Ken Leisner. These were teachers. These were leaders. These were guys who had incredible integrity and passion for what they did. And that influenced me as a young coach coming up. And I wanted to be part of that. And then once I got into it, then I understood the science and everything like that. But really the thing I gravitated towards was the character of these guys that called themselves high-intensity strength coaches, because I didn't find that on the other side of things.
Interesting. So that was like how they got you, how they influenced you was more their character, not necessarily the principles or the compelling nature of something like high-intensity training or the more kind of evidence-based protocols.
It was kind of together, the character, but certainly I was influenced by the science as well.
Okay. Now this is interesting. So when you look at take the NFL for example now, what do you see? Is because I'm not as, I guess, I'm not as exposed to it as you might be. Does this kind of coaching folklore, this that gets, I guess, perpetuated through the generations, which is my understanding as to one of the reasons why strength coaches in professional sport do tend to teach a lot of these same kind of crazy principles that really have no basis in effective strength and conditioning. Do you still see that? Is it still very prevalent now?
The high intensity principles?
Well, no, the less effective principles. So for example, my understanding currently in professional sport is you've got a lot of strength and conditioning coaches that are using, stuff like sport specific training, in air quotes, and, just all sorts of insane resistance training protocols that really have no place for an athlete.
That is the norm right now. It used to be in the heyday that it was kind of split between evidence-based training and non-evidence-based training. Now the norm is non-evidence-based training. This crazy stuff that's going on, and it's really too bad. It's not just at the professional levels; it's at the collegiate levels and the high school levels. I had a gentleman in a very big fitness club here in the United States. He's the number 3 man, and they have clubs all over the United States. And very proudly, he told me, "You walk into our clubs, it's like walking into a gym in the 1930s." And he was proud of this fact. And I'm thinking to myself, the thing that has marked all industries, not just the fitness industry, but all industries right now, are our technological advances. We haven't come. We're the only industry I know that's going backwards rather than going forward, and it's incredibly sad.
Why? Why is that?
I've got some ideas. Because in the United States right now, exercise isn't regulated. In most fields, you have to be certified by a certifying body, and I think most certifying bodies are evidence-based. Exercise, that's not the case. You can have somebody who graduated in plumbing call themselves a personal trainer or strength coach or anything like that, and nobody will hold them accountable for that unless they hurt somebody and somebody brings them to court and an attorney asks for his credentials. But because we have an industry where you have professionals mixed with non-professionals, I think this is where you see the discrepancies you do. Because most people don't know the science when it comes to particularly strength training.
I'm sure you've probably had conversations with athletes before. You probably have these all the time still, I imagine, where they're like, look, I want to train like you, coach, and follow the principles that you teach, but my coach wants me to do, snatches and fill in the blank and more risky exercises. And they don't want to, they want to try and avoid that confrontation. And, let's say they've got a pro contract, then obviously it gets even more sensitive. So what type of advice do you give those athletes?
Well, one thing you have to understand right at the outset is whether you call it high intensity training or evidence-based training, it will never be sexy. It'll never be one of these things where people are going, wow, these are basic fundamental principles that we are doing, and it's extremely hard physically to do and mentally to do. And what's sexy is taking a rope now and that's sexy. That looks cool. That, is balancing on a physio ball. Wow, that's cool and everything like that. And it's not hard. So you have to understand that even though the high intensity principles will give you the absolute best results in the safest manner possible and the most efficient manner possible, it's not sexy. It's not sexy to go in and do perfectly performed repetitions to a max where your eyeballs are falling out and the muscle is burning and it's very uncomfortable, as opposed to sitting on a physio ball with 5-pound dumbbells and doing this. It's the path of least resistance. So the question is, do you want to do something productive that's very hard and safe, or do you want to do something easy and sexy? And most people, unfortunately, choose the easy and sexy.
Okay, so maybe you don't get that question as much as I thought you would.
Yeah.
What would be a typical strength training program you put NFL players through?
Well, whether it's an NFL player or a stay-at-home mom or a high school athlete, I put them on the same program, and that is total body training. For my master's thesis at Ohio State, I took an infrared camera and took infrared pictures of athletes performing skills, because I was going to identify, infrared obviously is going to pick up the heat. When muscles contract, they produce heat. So anywhere on the infrared film of the body that shows red, it's muscles that are contracting. So I took pictures of football players. I took pictures of tennis players, basketball players, baseball players, lacrosse players. I even took pictures of people bowling. And what do you think I saw?
The whole body.
I saw the whole body was red. So the training application there is muscles serve 4 functions. They promote movement, they resist against movement, they support movement, or they help movement. So in one way, shape, or form, no matter what the task is, the muscles synchronize together to perform that particular task. So the training application is, if you are going to use all the muscles, you need to train all the muscles. So the next step in my evolution of my master's thesis was I took pictures of people walking upstairs, making a phone call, holding a mother holding a baby. And again, I saw the same thing. The whole body was red. So when I prescribe routines, they are always total body routines. The only thing that I would distinguish between an NFL and somebody else is, maybe I would do a little bit more grip work. I would make sure that we emphasized head and neck training with those guys to prevent spinal cord and traumatic brain injuries. And but again, I would recommend that for the stay-at-home mom too.
Now, just diving into the protocol in a little bit more detail, would you advocate multiple sets? Would it be a single set to failure? How much rest? How would you manage those variables?
Arthur Jones made famous the single set training to a maximum effort. Generally, it was 1 set to 8 to 12 repetitions. And that's how I first learned training. And I was very motivated by it. I made tremendous results. And I'm into this stuff, but I couldn't see myself doing 1 set of 8 to 12 reps for the next 8 years. So I understand that the human needs variety in their training. So I actually came up with single set and multi-set protocols. And the reality is, in the NFL, most of my players were coming in from multi-set protocol colleges. Mm-hmm. So I would include single set and multi-set protocols, but we terminated the set at an absolute max. So let me give you an example. One protocol I came up with, I called it progressions. Other people call it rest pause. So we would find a weight, and the weight would stay the same through all 6 sets. So the first set, they would do 1 repetition. Then we wait 10 seconds. Then on the second set, after 10-second break, same weight, we do 2 reps. Again, we'd wait 10 seconds. Then 3 reps, wait 10 seconds. Then 4 reps, wait 10 seconds. All the way through 6 sets. Okay, to them in their mind, that's 6 sets. Okay, it's not a single set. It really is, but it's 6 sets in their mind. But it accumulated 21 reps. And so when you institute a protocol, you have to have progression in the protocol. So the deal was, once they got 21 or more reps, then we increased the weight the next time.
Well, that's a really interesting thing you mentioned there about you're kind of alluding to progressive overload, right, in the terms of the training protocol. Now, I was listening over some previous podcasts I've done recently with other guests, some of those being scientists who are kind of doing the research within this within the kind of resistance training space. And one of those guests made the claims that there's insufficient evidence that actually we need to be increasing the resistance or difficulty on exercises indefinitely. And actually, if we were to just train to failure, or that could be 1 set or multiple sets, it doesn't matter. But so long as we get to failure, you're going to stimulate everything you can. Do you disagree with that? Because I'm just, in his view, there's a lack of evidence to support the progressive overload theory.
Well, I really haven't seen anything to not substantiate progressive overload. I think exercise provides a stimulus to the muscle, and then if you give it the proper rest and the proper nutrition, you'll have a physiological adaptation, you'll be stronger. So now that the muscle is stronger, it's going to take a higher stimulus to get higher physiological adaptations. And so I would say that, yeah, progressive overload that's why charting what you do is so important. No, I think it's an absolute necessity, because if you're not charting and you just say, okay, I just took it to a max. Well, when you're training, a lot of times most times you're dealing with discomfort. And maybe on some days you come to that discomfort earlier than other days. And you really don't know. You haven't really written anything down. So now you're kind of swinging in the dark. Did you hit a maximum effort, or was it more of a mental maximum effort? So I like to chart and see that progression. So now you did 11 reps last time and you're on a protocol where you got to get 12. If I know I got 11 and I've got to get 12 to improve, I'm probably going to get 12 and I'm going to get better.
The only way I would challenge that is that some people will cheat form in order to get that 12th and may not necessarily have a productive workout as a result. But also, I guess, I get what you're saying. Like, I chart my own and I measure time under load rather than reps. And let's say I'm doing, because I do a lot of body weight stuff, which is difficult to scale up the difficulty with body weight. It's not obviously just a case of putting an extra pin in the weight and upgrading it by 5 pounds. So what I tend to do is, I increase my time under load over time, and then I will change the chin up. Just say I'm doing a chin up, I'll change the protocol to like a more difficult partial range of motion or something like that. But I guess with all this being said, surely there's a point where we reach a kind of a limit to what we can gain in terms of strength. And then isn't it just a case of maintaining that? So at that point, would you still advocate progressive overload, or do you just say, no, just keep aiming for that, or should one always be bettering themselves? Just wondered how you think about stuff like that.
I've always tried to progressively increase to make things harder. I mean, when you're talking about ultimate potential, do we actually get there? You say we're going to eventually get it. I don't know. Do we? I mean, Einstein was asked that same question about mental capacity, and people theorized he's used 25% of his mental capacity. This is Einstein. Your ultimate mental cognition. What is it? Well, he said that if we could use 100% of our brain potential at will, we could probably levitate. Well, I don't know. Now you're getting into crazy stuff. But when you say you've reached your maximum muscular potential, I mean, where is that? What is that? Are you sure that's the case? I don't know. I've always tended to believe that strength training is a means for improvement, a method of improving your body. And if you're not continually increasing, whether it's your time under load or reps or stuff like that, I think you choose your results based on your intensity or your level of effort. And if you reach a point where you're comfortable with your body and your strength level, by all means, maintain where that is. But I think there's always a little bit more you can squeeze out of your body and get a little bit better. I'm 58 years old right now, and I think I'm stronger now even than when I was 28 years old.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I love
because
that
when
energy.
I think I think just being humans, it's nice to have a goal, to look back at what I did my last workout and try to beat that this workout. And sure, you could do bad reps to do that, but that's where the discipline comes in, and that's where the principles come in.
But like and I really respect that, and it's very inspiring to hear, and it's something that I want to always have that, I guess, attitude towards my own training. But I guess correct me if I'm wrong, but you probably reached your own muscular potential, I assume, in your 20s and 30s, early on in your own resistance training career, and then it was very incremental after that. So I guess that's just looking at muscle hypertrophy. So I hear what you're saying, like you want to always try and improve your performance, but it was my understanding that we there's a few ways we can see if someone has kind of maxed out their genetic potential from a muscular development point of view. Obviously there's things like, people Ellington Darden used to talk about wrist size being an indicator of one's potential. I'm just curious how you think about that. Do you think, that actually the ceiling for someone is something actually we don't know much about at all? And that actually one, it wouldn't hurt one to, if that's their hobby, to try and pursue that. Obviously, probably naturally, ideally not using, steroids and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, what you're getting into now is a speculation game, and I'm more into the improvement game. I want to take you from A to B. So where your C is, your ultimate potential, we're just speculating right now. But I'm looking at what's going to improve your health, what's going to improve your strength, and let's just keep going in that direction. Whether or not we hit that point, whether it's based on wrist circumference or not, our mental attitude and frame of reference should be improvement every time we train.
Cool. No, fair enough. Good stuff. All right. So a few questions I wanted to ask you more about the kind of nuances of resistance training. So I was watching one of your seminars and you were talking about single joint versus multi-joint and how to, this is obviously one of your seminars from like 4 or 5 years ago, and how to configure workouts with those types of exercises. I was recently reading some research by Dr. Paolo Gentile, and he did a piece of research that suggested that single joint exercises offered nothing in terms of additional benefits or hypertrophy over, or maybe even strength, I believe, over multi-joint. So there was really no place, in his opinion, in a regime for those exercises. Do you agree with that? How has that influenced the way you used to configure your exercises for your athletes?
Well, I'd like to see that research because I do know that muscles don't have eyeballs. Muscles don't know whether you're doing single joint movements, multi-joint movements. They don't know whether you're doing 1 set, 2 set, 3 set. They don't know if you're using free weights or your body weight or machines. All they do is contract against resistance. So if you introduce a stimulus that facilitates an overload to that muscle, there has to be a physiological adaptation, providing you give it the proper nutrition and the proper time of recovery. Mm-hmm. So I would refer you to James Fisher. He's done a lot of research on protocols, machines, and basically in his papers he says it doesn't matter.
Oh yeah, I agree. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you're using free weights, machines, single joint, multi-joint, 1 set, 2 sets, high reps, low reps. What matters in that set when the rubber hits the road is, did you overload that tissue or didn't you? If you did, and you give it the time and nutrition, you're going to have a physiological response to that.
Oh yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think I misphrased the question because I wasn't saying that single joint was inferior. I was just kind of saying if you're doing multi-joint already, whether or not single joint offers any additional benefit. I'm very familiar with Dr. James Fisher. I've had him on the show 3 times, I think, and read his work and a huge fan of him. I'm actually seeing him in January next year, so we're going to do some in-person stuff, so that'll be quite fun. That's good stuff. Okay. Talking about neck training now, you've always been, from what I can see, a huge advocate of people training their neck, and you feel it's a very important, often something that gets excluded from training programs. I just wondered, if one doesn't have, not everyone has a 4-way neck machine in their garage, right? So what kind of protocol would you advocate for like manual neck training in terms of like exercises and volume and frequency?
Well, first of all, neck training is neglected, and it's in priority the most important thing an athlete and non-athlete need to train. You see concussions in the media every day, and the reason that is true is because it is a worldwide epidemic. We just don't know how to deal with it right now. And when you talk about sports, spinal cord injury is the most catastrophic thing that can happen in sport. So why is head and neck training so important? Well, we know that when we train muscles, it has a systemic effect on bones as well. So when you train muscles, bone mineral density increases. So when you train the muscles in your neck, the cervical vertebrae are getting thicker and stronger. Ligaments get thicker and stronger. So in training muscle, you have a systemic effect that makes all those joints more structurally sound. And all head and neck movement is determined by your head and neck muscles. So all indications are by training the neck, you will decrease spinal cord injury and you will mitigate traumatic brain injury. Now I'll answer your question. With that in mind, we talked about total body training, and all muscles are just as important, except for the head and neck. That is paramount. We need to train that area. So if that's the most important, if that's priority 1, why are we messing with manual resistance exercise? Because you see, with manual resistance exercise, it requires skilled partners to do that. And if we're doing that in mass, let's say with high school students, say, okay, we don't have a 4-way neck machine, but we're going to use manual resistance exercise. Now you're putting the most important muscle in the hands of unskilled people. And yeah, you can train and evolve and teach them and everything like that. But again, Lawrence, this is the most important muscles you can train in your body. The head is the most vulnerable piece of anatomy because it is attached to the body by way of the neck. And research clearly shows that it's just physics. The mathematical equivalent to your neck is a cylinder. And physics says if we increase the circumference of the cylinder, we'll make it a better energy dissipator. And if we could increase the stiffness of the cylinder, we can make it a better energy dissipator. What does that mean? That means that we can, the mechanism of concussion is acceleration and deacceleration forces on the brain caused by movement of the head. So if we can slow down the head by making the cylinder stronger and stiffer, we can slow down the brain and the mechanism of concussion and affect cervical spine injuries as well. So my deal is, if you're going to default to manual resistance training of the neck, to me, you're saying it's not a priority. This is a priority, and you put your money where your priorities are. Kids need to see progressive results in those muscles. Let me give you a practical example with concussion. Generally, when a kid is going to a return to play concussion protocol, there's a graduated progression in there. they'll start them doing aerobic exercise. And if they can do aerobic exercise without symptomology, then they can progress into strength training. Then if they can do strength training and not have symptomology, then they'll progress them into retaking their baseline cognitive test. Now, if all these go well, and usually at the front end of concussion, it's kind of a cocoon thing where you're totally shut down away from social media, light, sound. You're basically in a cocoon. Well, muscles use it or lose it. So all through this protocol, what are happening to the cervical muscles? They're getting weaker. But yet he's still been able to do aerobic exercise, do some strength training, and pass his cognitive test. But I'm saying, wait a minute here. This kid's neck is 30 pounds weaker on flexion, extension, lateral flexion. Prior to him being concussed, you're saying he's ready to play. He's not ready to play. Because I've got his records of where he is. He's got to be at 100% of what he was pre-concussed before he's ready to go in and play. So basically, Lawrence, what I'm saying is, if all you got is manual resistance, that's all you got. But I think because this is such a priority, you need to be taking a look at getting something that's worthy of that muscle in that area.
What about self-applied resistance? I mean, that's what I do with, my own hands. I mean, not talking about using a partner. So when I meant manual resistance, I was talking about, just on oneself during a workout. Because people don't have the budget for a 4-way neck machine, most people. And I appreciate what you're saying and how important it is, but I can't see that being feasible unless someone's got a high intensity trainer nearby who will, typically they will stock that kind of equipment rather because a commercial gym won't in most cases, certainly not in the UK or Ireland. I don't have anything like that near where I am in Ireland. So what would you, so is that okay to use your own, using things like, I don't know, you call it, I suppose manual resistance with your own hands, pushing against your head in the different directions. Is that, in your opinion, going to be effective?
I think it can be. Obviously, you're not going to be able to quantify it.
Yeah.
I think if you have those circumstances where you just do not have the resources to train it progressively on a machine, I think manual resistance is your only alternative, or self-applied. What you're talking about, self-applied manual resistance. That's the old Charles Atlas dynamic strength training, they called it. But again, your muscle has no perception of what's providing the resistance. If you apply the resistance right with manual resistance exercise, you're going to get a physiological response. The thing I would caution you, though, is a lot of people will they'll do it isometrically. And the problem with that is you only get strong at the angles trained. Muscle is angular specific. You're going to get strong in the angles you train. You don't know what angles you're going to get concussed at. So to train the muscle with manual resistance or self-applied resistance, make sure that you are training it through the full range of motion.
That's interesting, because I thought that research showed that if you did an isometric in any exercise, be it a chin-up or just as an example, if you hold yourself at the top of the bar, that actually one gets stronger in the full range of motion. But you're saying that's not the case.
Arthur Jones did some work on the Medix lumbar extension when he first started, and he showed that in his studies that there were some people that he called them G subjects that were general adapters, and then there were S subjects, which were specific adapters. And we don't know which ones we are, but what he'd do is he would train everybody through a limited range of motion. The general adapters got strong through all the ranges. The specific adapters only got strong at the angles that were trained, and they were the majority of the people. And I would think that may be muscle by muscle too. So is your neck a general adapter, or I don't know if anybody would know. So to be safe, I would say train it through the full range of motion.
Okay, so even if you were doing self-applied manual work, you would do isometric. You would move the neck through the full range.
Exactly.
Okay, and what other ways do you advise people train the neck in terms of specifics?
Again, there's an appropriate way. There's a lot of entrepreneurs out there that are trying to take advantage of the concussion crisis right now. So there's some things on the market where I think they're well intended, but they're not well educated. One is, I think that you should stay away from axial rotation of the neck, because you talk to most orthopods and they say that when the neck is held, or when the spine is held, whether it's thoracic or cervical, when it's held in an isometric contraction and then you twist or rotate, that is the main mechanism of disc injury. So I would not advise doing axial rotation.
What is axial rotation? Sorry, I'm not familiar with that type of movement.
That's right. Where you're rotating bringing your chin from your left shoulder to your right shoulder.
Okay, so for those listening, Mark is spinning his head from shoulder to shoulder
yeah.
to explain that. Okay, cool.
And you have to understand there are over 60 muscles in the neck, depending on the anatomist you talk to. And they will tell you that the neck has multi-functions. There's like your biceps, they flex and supinate the arm. Okay, most neck muscles have multi-pulls and functions. So if you are doing just the basic flexion, extension, lateral flexion, you are getting all the axial rotators anyways. So there's no need to isolate that specific movement.
Do you have your own neck machine at home?
I do.
Nice.
I do.
What's your machine of choice?
Well, I actually designed a machine that I'm producing right now. It's called the head and neck isolator. And I knew that making a neck machine, and I wanted to isolate the head muscles, you have to make it idiot proof, particular for coaches. So strength training is very simple. You put resistance against the function of the muscle. Okay, so the function of the flexors and extensors of the neck is full range of motion. Okay, but the protocol for hitting the neck is the large strap muscles of the neck will override the smaller muscles if in fact they are fresh. So you must first pre-exhaust the flexors in order to get at the smaller head flexors. Now the head flexors only have 10 degrees of head motion. And so the machine actually stops you at 10 degrees. And you can isometrically push in the fully contracted position there. Likewise, the head extensors only go back 25 degrees of range of motion. So the machine will stop you at that. So the machine was built in relation to the protocol that we designed, which was neck flexion to head flexion, and then neck extension to head extension. So the machine basically makes it idiot proof.
Is it available for purchase now? Do you want to plug that machine quickly?
Well, I'm selling it through a company called Dynamic Fitness and Strength.
Right.
They're out of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and they have you can Google Dynamic Fitness and Strength and find it under the specialized machines that they sell.
Cool. I'll link that up in the show notes. Interesting. So I just wondered how much, and I know this is probably minimal, but how much recruitment would you get of the neck in, say, other movements like a pull-up, for example. And also there are movements where, you're working the neck in terms of holding it neutral during certain exercises, especially body weight stuff. How do you think about stuff like that?
Before I answer that question, can I make a comment before we leave the neck machine?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
I don't want your listeners to think that this is a quid pro quo thing, that I'm developing this neck machine because I want I'm an entrepreneur going to take advantage of this crisis. I designed this machine in response to this crisis. Mm-hmm. And certainly as a professional, I do want to see a profit, but more than anything, I want to see kids and adults training their head and neck and getting this very important area trained.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
And now your question, I didn't quite
it's all right.
get
that. Do you want me to repeat?
Yes, please.
Yeah, sure. So, I appreciate that this is not obviously going to have probably the same stimulus as direct work that we've been discussing already. But there are several movements in especially in bodyweight training where you're holding the head neutral and you are in some way stimulating the muscles in the neck. I'm trying to think of examples, but I believe maybe in something like an inverted row, you might be, or maybe even in a pull-up motion. Are we getting work there when we're doing some of those movements? Are we getting worthwhile work on the neck? I imagine there wouldn't be enough to not do any direct work at all, but what's your thoughts about that?
There was a interesting study that was done in Japan because a lot of strength coaches will tell me we don't have time to work the neck. But we do shrugs. So we we stimulate the neck by doing shrugs. And so I wish I remembered the name of the author that did this. But what he did is he took he had a control group. Then he had a group that did shrugs only. And then he had a group that did direct neck strengthening only. And his measurements were isometric neck flexion and extension. And he found out that doing nothing or doing shrugs did not affect neck strength. In fact, in order to affect neck strength, you have to directly stimulate those muscles.
Right, okay, cool. I've got a question which is it's a more sort of selfish question, and I just wondered whether you could help with this. So my girlfriend has recently sustained an injury. It's a swelling just below the knee. It's no surface bruising, but it's kind of a dull ache like through the day, and then pain when she moves it, so when she articulates the knee. No idea what's caused it. She does do a leg press, and it's one of these leg press machines in a commercial gym where it's probably not that well designed. It's not like a MedX machine or an Autos machine or something like that. And I just wondered whether or not that might be the cause of the injury. I thought at first it sounded like shin splints. Is that? I know you'd have to probably see it to diagnose something like that. But what are your thoughts just hearing what that might be and how we might be able to help her heal her leg faster?
There's a couple of things that go with that question. One is, and I think it plagues our industry, and that is people stepping outside their bounds of expertise. I'm a dumbbell coach. I'm a strength coach. So it's not my area of expertise to diagnose injuries. So I would feel real uncomfortable doing that. The problem is there's a lot of people that don't feel uncomfortable doing that. And that's what mucks up a lot of the stuff that goes on this industry. We have to understand our areas of expertise and be humble enough to, I would certainly refer her to an orthopod or a physical therapist because that's their skill set. Once you step outside your skill set, you render opinions. And opinions is what gets us in trouble. So the other side of that question is, in training, you always let pain and swelling be your guide. So if you're having acute pain while you're performing the exercise, your body is telling you that that's contraindicated. Mm-hmm. Or the next day, if you have profuse swelling, it's also telling you it's contraindicated. So then at that point, as a strength professional, you need to modify the workout to eliminate pain and swelling. And generally, there's a number of things that can be done. She could work isolaterally until the injury is healed. Mm-hmm. You could work just the pain-free range of motion and not work into where she's feeling pain. You can imagine in the NFL all the injuries that I worked through, and that's generally what we did. We worked pain-free range of motion, and what was remarkable is when you start working the pain-free range of motion, over time as the injury healed, we were able to work greater and greater ranges with the athlete. Or if it was acute and it was just too painful, we worked isolaterally.
Cool. I really respect what you just said, about, this not being your area of expertise, so you'll defer to another expert. And I certainly will. And I've got other people in mind who obviously specialize in that area to ask, but I do really appreciate your recommendations from an exercise point of view. As I know that was completely out of left field, but I did promise her I would ask you today. What does your own workout look like now? I mean, you mentioned you're strongest you've ever, stronger now than you were when you were 28. You certainly look good. So what's your current workout protocol look like for yourself?
I'm very fortunate. When I was in the NFL, I was able to consult with a lot of companies on product design and stuff like that. And I never took a consulting fee. I just took equipment. So I've got a 3-car garage, and 2 stalls are filled with exercise equipment right now. The third is for my wife's car, and those of your listeners that are married will understand that dynamic. But I have a very good facility that I strength train in, and I do the basics. The one thing that I've done is I've really emphasized as I've gotten older, the rest. So I will train every 4 days. I'll train hard. And usually my training sessions take 30 minutes at the very most, covering exercises that I'm going to train my whole body. I keep variety built in there. I have 4 different workouts that I rotate through. I'll allow myself 3 days of recovery before I train again. So I train every 4 days, once every 4 days. And the reason I'm stronger at 58 than I was at 28 is because I was doing poor reps, I think, when I was at 28. And now I don't know if Doug McGruff would call mine a super slow protocol, but it's very joint friendly and very little tension on the joint. It's all on the muscles.
And sorry, I don't know if you just said this, but is this a single set or multiple sets? And do you train to failure every time?
I do train to a maximum effort, and I do incorporate single and multi-joint protocols, just for the variety thing, not because it's going to get me better results. It just keeps me motivated. I will change. I chart everything I do. So generally, I'll fill up 2 sides of the cards. Then I'll give myself 10 days off before I start my new one. And then I'll come up with 4 different routines and different protocols.
So you'll do your 4 workouts and then have a 10-day break after that. You cycle through all of that, or
I'll do my 4 different routines, and when I filled up both sides of the card, which would probably take about 3 months, okay. And then I'll give myself 10 days off. And then I'll start in again on another cycle.
Do you think that's a valuable thing to do, to every 3 months take an extended period of time off?
I think it is. I think when you train really hard and it's very uncomfortable, taking that extended time off, I know it's helped me more psychologically, probably physiologically as well.
And sorry, one last thing. Did you say you do single sets or multiple sets on each exercise?
I do both.
Okay.
It depends upon the time I have. Obviously, single sets are usually faster than multi-sets. So if I've got some time, but I incorporate, what I do personally is I'll do single sets for the lower torso one day and then multi-set for the upper torso on one workout. And then I'll switch it the next workout. I'll come back and do multi-set for the lower torso, single set for the upper torso.
Awesome. I've got some rapid fire questions before we wrap up, if that's okay.
Okay.
The answers don't have to be rapid fire, but the questions are quite quick. What sort of strength and conditioning or health and fitness book have you personally reread the most? I don't know if you're much of a book reader.
I do. I read more research papers than I do books. But if I was to steer you towards a book, probably most recently it would be Doug McGruff's. Anything Doug writes, I just literally go over his, and I can't remember.
Body by Science.
Body by Science, yeah. And then he came out with a revision to that, basically going over questions they received from
the Q&A, the Body by Science question and answer book. Yeah, it's an amazing book.
Outstanding book. Dan Riley had some books out that were very good. I don't know if they're in print anymore. I think a lot of the stuff that Arthur Jones wrote, Bulletins 1, Bulletin 2, are good stuff to read. But, again, basic, fundamental principles.
But as you said, now you consume mostly the literature, so you'll be on PubMed a lot of the time, looking at the latest research, yeah?
Yes.
How do you? Just curious. How do you operate when you go on PubMed? Like, how do you use that to get the information you want to learn about? Because I find it's always such an intimidating interface to use. I've got a lot better myself at reading studies. I never used to be. So how do you use that to get the information you want to find?
Well, to be honest with you, over the last 5 years, I've done more. I've read 110 or more research articles as it relates to traumatic brain injury. So when I go to PubMed, it's very specific. They have, their Google, it's not a Google search, it's a PubMed search for specific words. And I generally find what I'm looking for through their search engine.
Got it.
By putting the words I'm interested in finding out about. Yeah.
To be fair, what I've found useful is if you just follow people like James Fisher, James Steele, Brad Schoenfeld, they tend to share all the latest literature on the muscle hypertrophy stuff, which I think is what most men are probably interested in.
Yeah. And so rather than going to PubMed, go to the end of their articles and look up their references, and you'll have plenty of good stuff to read.
Quite often they'll just post the papers. They'll do a small caption on Facebook and then just link straight to the paper, which is really useful. What have you changed your mind about in the last year in relation to strength and conditioning?
Interesting question. Not a change in mind, because, like I say, fundamentals don't change. Our bodies haven't changed in the last. In other words, our physiology hasn't changed. So why should the way we approach strength training change? And this is where I was talking earlier. In order to get the physiology, the best benefit out of it, you obviously have to work it the hardest, and you have to give it a high quality stimulus. And more than anything, that's been reinforced to me as I get older, and I see the results in the body that I get from doing the basic fundamental stuff. So if anything that I've changed in my mind, I will err on the side of giving my body more rest than more work. Because the biggest question I get as a strength coach is, how much do I have to work to get the ultimate results? And I think there needs to be a paradigm shift there. If we're always looking at the most exercise we have to do to get the largest benefit, that's the wrong question. The better question is, what's the least amount of exercise? What's the least amount of stimulus we need to give our bodies to get the absolute best results? So I think more than anything I've changed in my career is defaulting on the side of rest rather than doing more exercise.
Interesting. And you've never seen a reduction in performance or aesthetics when going down that, when choosing the rest option instead?
In my career, no. I think, and it's unfortunate because right now in the industry, you look at CrossFit, you look at Insanity, you look at a thing called Orange Theory now, and all people are talking about is the more you do, the better it is. The more you do, it's almost like they're cutting rest out of the exercise and fitness equation, and it's a shame because the exercise is a stimulus, but what's going to give you the physiological adaptations, as you know, is that rest.
Yeah, it's like I think Dr. Doug McGuff said it best. It's like a meme that can't be killed. Actually, I think he was talking about protein intake or something like that. But yeah, he would probably say the same thing about this, which is that, people still think it's the Rocky Balboa syndrome, right? They think more is better when it comes to exercise stimulus, and it's just not. It's evidently just not necessary to go overboard with the stimulus, and I totally agree with you. Again, last question, and then we'll wrap up. What insight about strength and conditioning have you acquired that seems obvious to you, but might not be obvious to everyone else?
I make it a habit, maybe every 3 weeks, to go in and watch people train in public facilities. And it's like walking into the land of the lost children. The biggest mistake I see is people don't lift weights, people throw weights. And, it's this emphasis on the weight over the technique that's so important to people. And it's really disparaging to go in there because you're looking at them doing orthopedically insane stuff. And in the end, strength training is supposed to help you and not hurt you. And what I see in the field right now is people doing more stuff to hurt themselves and predispose themselves to injury rather than really actually help themselves. It's what I tell people. This understanding these principles, it's simple to understand. It really is. It ain't simple to do, but it is simple to understand. And I guess the challenge to your listeners is the more we can educate people to train properly, the more sanity we're going to bring to exercise.
And how do you just looking at it from a, earlier on we were talking about how a lot of the elite level strength and conditioning coaches have it all wrong in a lot of cases. How do we change that behavior?
Boy, that's the $1 million question, Lawrence. If I knew that, the problem is, I really think the internet and the rise of the internet has really hurt exercise, because now kids will go to the internet and they'll see some professional athlete who has no clue on the strength training principles doing some orthopedically incorrect stuff, but yet in spite of that, he's a great athlete. So the association by the kid is, if I do what he does, then I will perform at that level as well. And that's just one example how misinformation gets around. Whether or not in the United States you bring regulation to exercise, I don't know if I want the government telling me how to prescribe exercise to my clients. I don't know what the answer is. but really, it's how we can disseminate evidence-based information to the populace, because right now it's certainly not getting there. Because most people I see when I go out in the public and I watch them train, I walk away discouraged.
Yeah, I agree, and I also think that there's a lot of like logical fallacies and kind of cognitive biases that people succumb to. I mean, and it's really, really powerful. Like if I live in Galway in Ireland now, and there's, I just don't know what it is, but something about Irish men just tend to be very muscular and large. And if I go to the local gym, I'm easily the smallest guy in there, and I'm surrounded by all these, big guys, very muscular guys. And it's very seductive. It's like, oh, they must be doing something different. It's that whole selection bias in play where these guys are here because of their genetics. That's why you're seeing all of this. It's not that the protocol necessarily got them where they are. And even though I know that, and I consider myself a fairly intelligent person, and obviously I've interviewed, 100, well, I think this will be number 102 episodes on the show, talking to people like you, but yet I still second guess myself, So I can only imagine how difficult it is for the layman to try and kind of negotiate that landscape, and make the right decisions. So I do, but you're right. I think the internet, a lot of content on the internet perpetuates that and makes it even more difficult for people to understand fact from fiction. And I just hope that this podcast isn't pulled into that mass and actually does. And I certainly think the content we've created today is very high quality and will help people. But yeah, it's trying to have an impact on that is what I'm saying. What I'm trying to do here. So
yeah, and that's the answer. The answer is education. So platforms like what you're doing with this podcast, hopefully it doesn't go out to a niche group, or maybe it does go out to a niche group, but then hopefully that expands, right, and has a difference in the industry. So hats off to you, Lawrence, because what you're doing here will make a difference.
That was so obviously me fishing for a compliment there, wasn't it? But I appreciate it. Mark, what's the best way for people to find out more about you and what you're up to?
I've got a website. It's www.coachaprotraining.com. I've got some information on there. I've got a lot of projects going right now. I'm writing a book on head and neck strength training, appropriate head and neck strength training. I'm also going to put together an online certification course for head and neck strengthening. I'm in the twilight of my career right now, and that's what I kind of see as my calling right now, is to get kids training their head and necks, get parents understanding of that, and coaches. Many times I feel like a voice crying in the wilderness, because there's just people that don't want to listen. Certainly coaches don't. I think I'm having my biggest effect with moms right now, to tell you the truth. And because moms are going to determine, whether or not these kids are going to play these high collision sports. And so a lot of these moms are saying, listen, coaches, if you want my son, he's going to train his head and neck. So I appreciate, platforms like yours, and so as far as me, I'm just doing a lot of work in that area right now.
Cool. Well, when that stuff's live and you've got web presence for it, email me and I'll update the show notes to link to that for sure. Yeah, definitely. And for everyone listening, for the show notes, links and resources, everything that both Mark and I mentioned for this episode, which will be oh God, I can't remember which number this will be now. But if you go to corporatewarrior.org, you'll see a full list of all the episodes. If you just Control F, Mark, you might want to Control F Asanovich, would probably be easier. And it will come straight up. And until next time, guys, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Before you head off, head on over to corpwarrior.com. That's corpwarrior.com to get your free high-intensity training Google Progress chart and ebook with 6 interview transcripts of some of my top guests, including Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, and Bill Day Simone on how to optimize muscle gain, fat loss, and overall health in an efficient, effective, and sustainable way. These transcripts are deliberately not verbatim. Instead, they've been transcribed in an easy read format to make it more enjoyable and easier for you to quickly pick out what you need and start getting results. To get your ebook, head on over to corpwarrior.com, enter your email address, then check your email for an email from me with a confirmation link. Once you click the link, you will be instantly redirected to a PDF version of the transcripts. This episode is brought to you by ARX, the most innovative, efficient, and effective all-in-one exercise machines I've ever seen. I was really impressed with my ARX workout. The intensity and adaptive resistance was unlike anything I've ever experienced. I love how the machine enables you to increase the negative load to fatigue target muscles more quickly, and I love how the workouts are effortlessly quantified. The software tracks maximum force output, rate of work, total amount of work done, and more in front of you on screen, allowing you to compete with your previous performance to give you and your clients real-time motivation. The ARX uses a computer-controlled motor to give you the exact amount of resistance your clients need 100% of the time. This means that the resistance can never become dangerous, is intuitive and simple to use, and can provide you with all the results you and your clients are looking for in a fraction of the time. ARX is highly effective and efficient in delivering all of the benefits of exercise, including increased strength, muscle mass, cardiovascular conditioning, bone mineral density, and injury recovery. As well as being utilized by many high-intensity training trainers to deliver highly effective and efficient workouts to their clients, ARX comes highly recommended by world-class trainers and brands, including Bulletproof, Tony Robbins, and Ben Greenfield Fitness. To find out more about ARX and how you can get $1,000 off software licensing when you place an order, that's right guys, $1,000 off, please go to arxfit.com and mention Corporate Warrior in the How Did He Hear About Us field. So again, to get $1,000 off software licensing when you order, head on over to arxfit.com and enter Corporate Warrior in the How Did He Hear About Us field. This episode is brought to you by the Resistance Exercise Conference, the science and application of strength training for health and human performance. Would you like to learn from the top strength training researchers, network and connect with other exercise professionals from all over the world, join a welcome reception on a Friday night to build relationships with other strength training professionals, experience an early morning workout from an expert trainer to kickstart your Saturday, and get inspired, rejuvenated, and focused on your strength training business? I certainly do, and that is why I am attending and interviewing all of the speakers at the event. The Resistance Exercise Conference will be held on the 9th and 10th of March 2018 in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the Commons Hotel. To get 10% off your entry fee, head on over to resistanceexerciseconference.com, click the registration button, and enter Corporate Warrior 10 in the promo code field in PayPal. I'm very excited about this and I've wanted to attend for years. Sign up now at resistanceexerciseconference.com and get 10% off with promo code Corporate Warrior 10, and I look forward to meeting you in person.